Vice President Vance and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are in Jerusalem today to confirm their commitments to the Gaza peace deal. They're discussing next steps for the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas.
We've had an unmatched alliance and partnership with the United States. That is changing the Middle East, and it's also changing the world. It creates opportunities not only for security, but for the expansion of peace.
We have a very, very tough task ahead of us, which is to disarm Hamas, but rebuild Gaza, to make life better for the people in Gaza, but also to ensure that Hamas is no longer a threat to our friends in Israel. It's something that we're committed to in the Trump administration.
Meanwhile, the IDF has identified the last 2 hostage bodies released, and a funeral is set to take place today. 13 deceased hostages are still in Gaza. Meanwhile, a mass funeral is happening in Gaza for 30 returned Palestinian prisoners, many of whom were unrecognizable to families because of, quote, severe circumstances surrounding their deaths. The IDF denies reports of signs of torture. Let's bring in ABC News foreign correspondent Tom Soufi Burridge and ABC News contributor and national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy for more on that. So, Mick, the vice president is meeting with returned hostages and families of those whose bodies have not yet been returned. Hamas says it needs more equipment to retrieve the bodies that are left from the rubble in Gaza. Is there a concern that this ceasefire won't last if it takes longer to return these last 13 bodies?
So, Dan, I think that's really going to come down to whether the assessment's made that that is actually accurate. And it makes sense. I mean, it's not easy to recover bodies without the proper equipment from piles of rubble. And oftentimes you need certain type of specialized dogs that can find the bodies under these destructed buildings to be able to essentially even begin to the process of recovery. So I think there is certainly many groups around the world that could be attached to the International Committee of the Red Cross that could go in there and do this. If the parties believe that that's necessary, and it probably is, then that should happen.
Tom, the vice president and the prime minister touted the U.S.-Israeli partnership. Is Vance there to put any pressure on Israel as well?
Yeah, I think there is definitely pressure, Diane, going from the U.S. administration on the Israeli government. I mean, most of that exchange we had between Vice President Vance and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem shortly ago was, heaping praise on the relationship, highlighting the kind of strength of that relationship and how they both have big hopes and aspirations, not only for Gaza going forward, but also for the region. But there were kind of subtle signs of differences. I mean, there was a question about whether or not the Israeli government would be happy about Turkish security forces being deployed into Gaza. Turkey is a big partner under President Erdogan of President Trump's and played a big role in brokering that peace deal between Israel and Hamas. And Netanyahu was pretty blunt, basically saying no. I mean, Israel would be opposed to that because Israel's relationship with Turkey is very complicated, and Hamas has been a bit of an ally of the Erdogan government. So, there are complexities in that relationship. We're expecting in the next half an hour there to be the funeral of a 41-year-old Israeli called Tal Haimi. This is his kibbutz, or was his kibbutz, and he was killed defending this kibbutz on October the 7th, 2023. His body was then taken by Hamas into Gaza, and he is one of the deceased hostages who has recently been returned. And that is one of the kind of immediate issues which there is progress on. So, yes, the big stumbling blocks, how do you disarm Hamas? These are unanswered questions, and no one seems to have a straightforward answer to that. But in the near term, the immediate term, what we are seeing is progress on that critical issue of not only returning the bodies of deceased Israeli hostages to their families so they can get proper burials, like Tal Haimi will finally receive in the next half an hour, but also the return of dozens of the bodies of Palestinians who are being returned to Gaza. That is also a critical part of the deal, although we're getting confirmation from the authorities in Gaza that many of those bodies just simply can't be identified before they're buried.
And Mick, the U.S. and Israel agree that disarming Hamas is crucial for peace in the region. How realistic is that goal? How do you make that happen?
So first of all, hopefully Hamas understands that that's part of the 20-point plan and they voluntarily disarm themselves. There's elements in the plan that provides protection, gives them sanctuary from reprisals, even allows them safe passage out. If they won't take that, maybe there's some kind of security mechanism that could be established by the stabilization force that can protect them, because ultimately it's not just their desire to continue being a terrorist organization. They've made a lot of enemies in Gaza. There's a lot of armed groups that want to take retaliation against them, want to take retaliation steps against them. So they feel potentially that they have to keep their arms, but that can't happen, or the IDF will not withdraw, and it will likely not be peace in the way that the 20-point plan imagines. So I think that has to happen. It's going to be probably the main effort as soon as they get the first phase complete, is how are we going to get Hamas to disarm so that we can move forward with all of the benefits that do come, not just to the people of Israel, which are considerable, normalization primarily, but also the people of Gaza, which need to see billions of dollars flow into a fund to rebuild Gaza and essentially reestablish a society there. That all comes in this agreement, but it has to start with the disarming of Hamas.
Tom, 13 hostage bodies are still in Israel. As Mick says, a lot will depend on the assessment of whether it's true that they are buried under rubble. More equipment is needed. Do you get the sense in Israel that there's patience for that, to wait for those results?
I think ultimately there is patience, because there has to be. I mean, is there disquiet? Then definitely two, Diane. And just earlier this week, we met with the parents of one of the two American deceased hostages who have not been returned. So they are two of the 13 bodies of dead hostages which remain in Gaza, just a few miles from where we are. So, you know, I think the families are impatient to get their loved ones home, because they've waited for more than 2 years and they haven't given them a proper goodbye. They do understand that some of those bodies might not be accounted for. The parents of Omer Nutra that we spoke to, his parents believe that Hamas, in their words, is playing games and is deliberately slowly releasing the hostages. And briefings they've got from the Israeli authorities confirm that, although Hamas denies that. They say they haven't got the equipment and there is so much devastation in Gaza, it will take time.
All right, Tom Soufi Burridge, Mick Mulroy, thank you both.